Hello. Welcome back to the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. As you will notice, this is the first time we've done this. We're doing it on video now. I am here. My name is Joel Bergman. I'm here with Marco Grotta, another activist with the Revolutionary Communist Party. We are just back after a fantastic weekend in Montreal, the Montreal Marxist Winter School, which was a fantastic success this year. Over 600 communists from across the country, good delegation of comrades came up from the United States, and we had a fantastic weekend of education, Marxist education. You can check out the report on our website, marxist.ca. And yeah, we are back today to discuss a very important issue. Donald Trump was elected just, a few months ago? And he has completely transformed the entire political dynamic in Canada. National pride was... Actually, I believe it was at an all-time low. A lot of people hated the government. People were very upset at Trudeau. Trump his intervention forced him to resign. It looked like the Liberal Party was in the doldrums. This threat of a trade war, the tariffs, the threat to annex Canada has completely transformed the political dynamic in the country. And we are here to discuss the communist approach to this. How do communists deal with this? There's a resurgence in kind of a nationalist sentiment. We all are in this together, the whole Team Canada thing. I guess what is the communist response? So with me today is Marco. Thank you for joining me, Marco. Maybe let's just get started, I guess. Yeah, what is there to say about this? How do communists respond to these threats from Trump and the response from Canadian politicians? You want to maybe start?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is that, first of all, this is, like you said, a major change in the situation, which needs to be taken seriously. That Canada exports 77% of its goods to the United States. If he puts a tariff of 25%. And now he said he'd go further, because now he's also threatened tariffs on aluminum and steel.
Yeah, and cars, right? Or vehicles.
Cars, and it seems like every day it's a new batch of tariffs.
Yep.
If you slap that against the Canadian economy, you're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of layoffs, factories closing. You're looking at entire industries being wiped out. People are talking about the destruction of the auto industry. They're talking about the destruction of the steel industry.
Yeah, Donald Trump said, they stole those jobs from us. We want them back. He wants them in Detroit.
And the fact is, probably a lot of that could be brought into the United States. The fact is that the Canadian economy is far more dependent on the U.S. economy than vice versa. And they don't have a lot of room for maneuver. So I think there is a very real fear that if these tariffs go through, it's going to mean mass devastation for Canadian workers. And I think it's a totally legitimate fear. But what do we do about it?
Exactly. That's the question. Obviously, I think many people have a short memory now. Everyone's very scared about Trump. That we can actually, working class people, we can quite often forget that these very same people that are now raising a hue and cry about Trump and the threat of Trump, which is a real threat, as Marco's outlined, are now the same people that are saying that we are all on the same team. These same people that have been overseeing a huge collapse in living standards, these same people that have privatized the healthcare system, that have attacked trade union rights, are now trying to claim that we're all on the same team. So I think from the starting point, one thing that's very important for communists is we need to take a working class approach. And we need to understand that within this kind of this nationalist sentiment that's developed in Canada, there is, there's two parts of it. There's this part that is kind of almost a genuine working class sentiment that is, we're scared of losing our jobs, and we don't want, in particular, there's a lot of really, Canadian workers have won many things that American workers don't have. In particular, free healthcare, and Canadian working class people don't want to lose that. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone knows about United. People don't want United up here. Mm-hmm. So I do think there is a genuine sentiment from Canadian working class people that want to defend these gains. They want to defend the unions. They want to defend the good jobs. The most advanced working class people in the country don't like Donald Trump. Of course, he's horrible. But then there's, like I said, there's two sides to this nationalism. The other side is these people that I was mentioning, these bourgeois capitalist politicians, these big CEOs of these huge, actually many of them monopolies in Canada that have been lording over us, that have been gouging us, that have been horrible to working class people, that are now duping people. They're trying to use this to fool working class people. So I guess right from the starting point, it's the job of communists, it's the job of revolutionary Marxists to expose this, to separate what is progressive, which is that working class sentiment, from what is reactionary, which is this bourgeois game, ruse, I guess, to trick working class people into uniting with them and to claim that we all have the same interests. And yeah, we are internationalists. Marx said the workers have no country. We defend what is good for the working class, no matter whether it's the Canadian working class, the American working class, and we don't believe that working class people in Canada benefit when the Americans lose their job, or Americans are going to benefit when Canadians lose their job. That's a race to the bottom argument from the capitalists, from the ruling class in each nation, essentially. I think that's part of this whole thing with the buy Canadian or buy American. You have this isolationist sort of localist argument that doesn't serve the interests of the working class. We'll get more into that later, but yeah, I don't know if you have any general comments to add on to that.
Well, I think, just to add, I mean, at the end of the day, what's actually going to save the jobs? Because you have this whole Team Canada phenomena, which involves all the major political parties, but also involves big business in Canada, also involves the NDP, also involves the trade union leaders. And they've all been saying the same thing. We need retaliatory tariffs against the Americans. We need more, like you said, buy Canada policies, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it might feel good to, punch back against Trump, but will this actually save Canadian jobs? And the fact
That's
is,
a question.
The fact is it won't. What retaliatory tariffs will do is it will help protect the market of Canadian big business while simultaneously driving up the prices for Canadian consumers. But that does nothing to save jobs here in Canada. And like you pointed out, these people aren't our friends. To most people, Canadian company is the same as an American company. Like just the other day, actually just today, Rogers just announced it's doing a new round of layoffs in their customer service division. A few months ago, Bell laid off 9% of its workforce. So these are supposedly our, great Canadian patriots who are helping the average Canadian. They've been laying them off.
While providing us with some of the most expensive cell-phone contracts in the world.
Yeah. But it just shows, like you said, the sham of this whole Team Canada. They're not our friends. And what they're proposing isn't going to help us. It's not going to help Canadian workers.
Yeah, so I guess on that, on the question of what is this Team Canada thing, and who's a part of it, I think it might be useful to go through. Like, for example, Justin Trudeau, who's still the Prime Minister. He still is for a few
easy to forget,
for a few weeks. But yeah, he said we will stand up for Canadian workers. He's been making a lot of noise about that. Must protect the jobs. Must we stand up for Canadian workers? And a lot of people are like, yeah, I got to stand up, forget that they didn't like Trudeau and they go, yeah, we got to stand up for Canadian workers. But then the question enters my mind, does Trudeau defend Canadian workers? We just need to look at last year. Just last year, what you had. We had quite an unprecedented situation. A minority Liberal government being propped up by the NDP that used this roundabout way to take away the right to strike from, what was it? I guess it was WestJet engineers last year.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first one. Then there was the rail workers.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was the postal workers. I'm forgetting there was also the Vancouver and Montreal port workers.
Mm-hmm.
No debate in the parliament.
Mm-hmm.
No vote in the parliament. A constitutional right or freedom or whatever you want to call it, generally considered such. The right to strike, basically the right to collectively bargain, was stripped from the trade unions by a party that is now claiming to that we're all on the same team and that they defend working class people. Interesting side note, the railways, the two big railways that were on strike, where the workers were on strike last year, they're actually owned by Americans. So just to point out here is that the government had absolutely no problem in siding with these people against these capitalists. They're American, they're Canadian, whatever, against the organized working class. So that's just Justin Trudeau. I mean, there's many examples. You got Doug Ford, who's generally considered Captain Canada now. He was coming out swinging early, but I don't know. You know a bit more about Doug Ford. You want to
Just about
explain?
Quickly on the Liberals, because
Okay, yeah.
the Liberals are always really good at draping themselves in the Canadian flag when it suits them. Like, I don't know if you saw, Trudeau made a point of showing how he was watching the game last night.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he sent a provocative tweet to Trump saying, what did he say? You can't take our game and you can't take our country.
Yeah, you can't take. It was the other way
Something
around.
like
You can't
that.
take our country and you can't take
Yeah.
our game.
It's helped them a little bit. The Liberals are up in the polls. But like you said, it's a sham. At the end of the day, this guy claims to stand up for Canadian workers, legislated every major strike in the last period back to work. Actually, yeah, not legislated through the CIRB without even a vote. But it's the same with the premiers. Yeah, Ford seems to be doing quite well as well. Captain Canada, like he said. Goes around with this goofy hat. I guess it's a rip-off of the MAGA hat.
Yeah.
Canada's not for sale. Most of these hats, by the way, aren't even manufactured in Canada.
That's the ironic thing.
Yeah, they get them from places like Vietnam, Bangladesh. The toques have apparently come from the United States, funny enough. Anyway. But he walks around with this hat. Canada's not for sale. Canada was very much for sale when he was in office because, everyone remembers the Greenbelt scandal. It was a huge scandal, which, by the way, hasn't been resolved. They're being investigated by the RCMP as we speak.
Yeah, for corruption, right?
For corruption. He gave away public land, which he said he would never open up, and handed it off to developers who were friends of Doug Ford, friends of the Conservative Party, and they made a windfall of, I think it was something like $8 billion off of this land. So Canada was for sale back then. It may not have been for sale to the Americans, but it was for sale to crooked capitalists in Ontario and in Canada. Danielle Smith, she's another one, Team Canada. You had a scandal erupt in Alberta just a few weeks ago. You mentioned healthcare, private healthcare.
Yep.
And I think that is a legitimate fear because people don't want to give up the single-payer healthcare system. Fair enough. But they're already destroying public healthcare in Canada.
It's not Americans that are doing that.
No, and they're selling it off piecemeal. We saw this with Danielle Smith. She fired, I think it was the head of AHS, the Alberta Health Service, because she was investigating corruption in the Alberta government, where they were selling off or giving these huge contracts to private surgical facilities that were massively overinflated. It was a total rip-off for the taxpayer. But of course, they're friends of the Conservative Party, so let them have it. She raised a fuss about it, and they fired her.
Yeah.
And so now it's come back to bit them in the ass. They've been selling off our healthcare system. So it's not just Trump who's the threat. It's the politicians and business people here who have been selling off the country.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Doug Ford. Doug Ford, didn't he privatize surgeries? A lot of surgeries in Ontario for the healthcare system. So if people are worried about the healthcare system, it is being privatized, it is being attacked, and it isn't by Americans. It's by Canadian capitalists, their politicians. And there is a layer of the Canadian bourgeoisie that are salivating, looking at the healthcare system. They want to profit from our health, from our illnesses, from sicknesses. They want to make a lot of money because, the American healthcare industry is a super profitable industry. It's horrible what they are doing. But capitalism ultimately cares about one thing above all else, above nation, actually, profit. And they were trying to get their dirty hands on our healthcare system. So I think, these very clearly on the question of on the question of healthcare, it's and many issues. These people are not our friends. On the question of the trade unions, on the question of the healthcare system, these people are not our friends. They're good. In the good Canadian tradition, they're good at talking out of both sides of their mouth, seeming like they're your friend when they're not at the end of the day. And so that's really what is happening here. And it is the first job of communists to really highlight this, to expose this charade. Ultimately, there is no Team Canada. There isn't a Team Canada because we are not on the same team. We do not have the same interests, and we are not on the same team. And look, these tariffs from Trump, you already mentioned a bit the counter tariffs. Yeah, you made the point. The counter tariffs, people ask, how are you going to protect jobs? They say counter tariffs. Counter tariffs actually don't really have anything to do with saving jobs. It's about protecting the market for the Canadian capitalists. And actually about punishing consumers, because what you're doing is you're driving up the cost of the American products coming in. So it's going to have an inflationary impact. But what does this have to do with protecting jobs? It doesn't. And actually, at the end of the day, these tariffs, according to the Bank of Canada, if there is a trade war, which is likely, it could lead to a 6% collapse in GDP. Maybe less. We don't know. Maybe more. With, like you said, hundreds of thousands of jobs being lost. Who's going to be the one firing these people? They talk about job losses as if they happen, as if Trump is the one that is firing people. It will be Canadian capitalists that are doing the firing. And what that means is they will be prioritizing their profits over the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of working class Canadians. And that is a fact of the matter. And they have a big interest now in taking this as far as they can to make everyone think that we're all on the same team, because they're probably planning this already. There's already some layoffs. I've seen a few minor layoffs, but they know that around the corner they're going to have to do some dirty work, and it's in their interest if people think they're friends. So I think, that's ultimately what's happening here. And these people are not our friends.
Just to add to that, it's either they're going to lay people off or they're going to blackmail us to keep production running.
Yeah.
And you already see this from, I was reading about, Lana Payne's statements, the leader of Unifor, her statement on this whole situation. And she was saying we need to support industry. We need to support steel so they don't lay people off. We need to support the automotive industry so they don't lay people off. Supporting industry, that can sound pretty good when you're under attack. But I think we got to be clear. What that means is corporate bailouts. That's what they're talking about. It'll be the same thing that happened with the COVID pandemic. We saw this wage subsidy. Again, it was a massive bailout for Canadian corporations. And the fact is, they took that money, they pocketed that money, they used it to pad their profits, and as soon as they could, they laid off workers. As soon as they had the opportunity. It did nothing to save jobs, but it was very good for padding the profits of Canadian business. But that's what they're going to be asking for again. Massive bailouts from the taxpayer to protect themselves. And who's going to pay for these bailouts? It's not going to be the rich. It's going to be ordinary people who are going to see cuts to services and so on that are going to pay for these bailouts. So I think that will be another feature in the next little while.
Yeah, so it seems around the political spectrum, there is almost unanimity on all major issues. Like you have the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP. I mean, it might be a little bit different in Quebec with the Bloc Québécois and stuff. I know the Parti Québécois are basically using this as an example of showing why Canada is broken and we need Quebec independence. That's a completely different issue. But the mainstream parties federally seem to be almost entirely united on the need for counter tariffs, the need for Buy Canadian,
Mm-hmm.
and the need for supports, bailouts, essentially what you just said, bailouts for big business. I don't know if Jagmeet Singh has openly said that,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't be surprised because because they did support the wage subsidy,
Yeah.
which was essentially a bailout in all but name in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
That was their idea, actually. And if key labor leaders like Lana Payne are basically come out in favor of, supports for industry, this is a bailout.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there much, I'm wondering, is there much difference here? I know that a lot of the labor leaders like Lana Payne and Jagmeet Singh as well from the NDP has made a lot of noise about workers, supporting workers and pushing for certain demands to support workers. I guess probably the main difference is they believe, maybe the Liberals had said something similar, that there should be big supports. If there's layoffs, there needs to be big supports for working class people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the slight difference here. I don't know.
Well, I read her statement, and at first, I was agreeing with a lot of it. I said the language she used was, we need a worker-led industrial response, and I thought, okay, good stuff. Yeah, we do need a worker-led response. But then you read the, dozen demands or so that she lines out. Not a single one involves the working class, like retaliatory tariffs. What does that have to do with the working class? Are the workers going to introduce the tariffs? What does that have to do with the working class? Supports for industry. Again, what is that? How is that led by the working class? What does that, how does that affect the working class? It has nothing to do with the workers. We also agree that you need a worker-led response, but an actual worker-led response. It seems that what she has in mind is making appeals to the government and big business to, throw us a bone. Maybe, shore up EI a bit. Maybe give us, some concessions in that form. But the fact is, okay, maybe in the past, Lana Payne's an older woman. In the past, maybe they could afford reforms, a few crumbs from the working class. But today, when you're looking at the deepest crisis in Canadian capitalism's history, what room is there for reforms? What room is there for reforms? There's none at all. It's a total fantasy land. Anyway.
Yeah, so I think that details fairly well what a lot of labor leaders are saying, is they're cloaking themselves in this "we want to defend workers" thing. But what it ends up being is defending Canadian capitalists and actually defending policies that they would never have defended in the past, or maybe they would have in some instances, but now they're really going for these this national unity. And as we said, this national unity thing is really unite behind the capitalists, the Canadian capitalists, for the benefit of the Canadian capitalists. And we should be clear about one thing too, these bailouts. There's been massive bailouts in the auto sector over the past 20 years. There's been huge bailouts to companies like Bombardier. Those things actually haven't made those industries competitive, and in the long run, they actually haven't saved the jobs. So it is not a way to save jobs. The bailouts, all it does is it puts a little Band-Aid on the problem temporarily. So, I think we need to say that clearly. This isn't a pro-worker policy. That is a pro-capitalist policy. Now, this all looks rather kind of... I hope people aren't watching this and getting depressed and thinking, "Oh no, everyone's being duped. What are we gonna do?" Right? Is there a solution? So far, we haven't actually touched on what a genuine solution is. So maybe we should really get into it. If, the trade union leaders, Alana Payne, Unifor, etc., they're claiming to support a working class solution, but it's not a genuine working class solution. What is a genuine working class solution to this problem, or solution, or approach to the question of the trade war? It's not our war. What do we propose to protect jobs? What do we propose working class people do? We are looking at I think a lot of workers are genuinely concerned. They're looking at this situation, which could be fairly quickly a big economic catastrophe, to be honest, with mass job losses and whatnot. So what do working class people do? How do we fight back against this? Are we sort of hopeless? We just have to support Jagmeet Singh and the and the trade union leaders and hope for the best or something like that. So I guess maybe we should just touch on what is the genuine working class communist response to this crisis, basically.
Well, I think on that question, I think a thing that we hear a lot is, we need to be realistic. We got a serious crisis and we need realistic solutions. And I think first we have to say, tariffs, Buy Canada, giving contracts to Canadian companies, all of this stuff. The idea that that's going to save Canadian jobs and Canadian industry, that is unrealistic. The idea that putting a 25% tariff on American goods is going to keep the auto plants running or is going to keep steel running, that is la-la land stuff. That is unrealistic. I think, sometimes people say what we say is unrealistic. It's very bold what we say, but I wouldn't say it's unrealistic. I would say that what we propose is the only actually realistic solution. And it's not that we're just saying, it's either communism or nothing. You need a fully developed, communist revolution, and that's the only way to save jobs. There are concrete measures, and we've seen them before, steps that workers can take to save their jobs. I think one of the biggest ones we've talked about is factory occupations. We say a factory closed is a factory occupied. If the Canadian capitalists are too frickin' cheap and they say they can't compete and they cry poor, and they're going to close down a factory and destroy a town, destroy Oshawa, destroy Hamilton, destroy whatever, we say, well, no, we're not going to accept that. We're going to continue running it under our own direction. If necessary, you nationalize that plant. If what you're producing is no longer, saleable, is no longer useful, retool. You saw this during the Second World War. You had lots of factories that produced one thing, and they were retooled to produce military equipment. Well, we would say do the same thing, except we're not producing tanks and so on. Produce things that we need, things for healthcare, things for whatever. That is a worker-led response, by the way, in response to Lana Payne. That is a worker-led response. It's not some suit in Ottawa putting tariffs. It's workers on the factory floor taking the initiative into their own hands. I think that's one big thing that we can argue. And I think there's examples of this before, I believe, in Ontario as well.
There's a bunch, yeah. It's not even that. It's not like you had it in Ontario in the 1930s and 40s, which you did. You had mass sit-down strikes and factory occupations at the time. That was actually the birth of the Canadian labor movement, is found in the manufacturing heartland and these big strikes, sit-down strikes and not factory occupations. No, but I'm talking fairly recently. There were a few 100,000 manufacturing jobs in Ontario that were gutted in the early 2000s. And in response, working class people, actually not the union leaders, working class people from the rank and file engaged in mass factory occupations. There was a number of them in 2006. I remember that at the time. Then there was a series in 2009. There was a number over the years. The latest ones was in 2019. I believe that was GM Oshawa, actually, which is very significant, where the workers occupied the plant. And we said the only way to save these jobs is you nationalize the factory, You have to take it out of the capitalist market, right? You have to take it out of the capitalist market, and you have to take it out of the profiteering of the capitalists who were shipping jobs overseas or to Mexico or sometimes even to southern states
Mm-hmm.
where they have anti-union legislation. It's they can make more money, right? But these are these oh so patriotic Canadian bourgeois who have for decades been shipping jobs and decimating communities. So no, let's not let them fool us. They are not on the same side. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, these factory occupations actually succeeded in keeping jobs for a period of time, sometimes, and winning concessions, severance packages, increased pensions, things like this, because at the end of the day, when the workers are mobilized, that's where the workers show their power.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we really think that what we need is a rank and file working class movement. The trade unions are big, powerful organizations with lots of money, lots of mobilization capabilities, and we think, yeah, a mass campaign to occupy plants to make sure that no job is going to be allowed to leave. We won't allow them to fire any Canadian worker. That's the real way to save jobs. Um, Also, I think even almost more simply, say you're at a plant that produces auto parts or something, and the boss says, "Well, the Trumps make or the Trumps the tariffs Trump's tariffs make it too difficult to keep our business open. We're gonna have to close shop. Show us.
Mm-hmm.
Open the books."
Mm-hmm.
They won't want to do that. The capitalists don't want to do that. Why not? Don't you care about Canadian workers? Don't you care about Canada in the abstract, of course? Show us the books. Let the working class have control. Let the working class see the ins and outs of the running of the plant of the business. And I bet you a lot of the time the tariffs are damaging, but a lot of the time it's actually more about their profit
Mm-hmm.
than actually keeping the jobs. Then they would just sooner. There was actually a poll that came out a little while ago that polled 160 top business leaders, and they said over half of them said that they've already. This was back in January.
Yeah.
That they've already started plans to shift investment and production south of the border. These are the same people. By the way, they're also 80% of them also want counter tariffs
Of course.
and buy Canadian and a whole bunch of stuff. These same people, they don't care
No.
actually. They're already shifting investments to the south.
I actually
Um,
read a couple more examples today. The two major companies have discussed moving their headquarters to the United States.
Okay.
And those two companies were Barrick Gold,
Oh,
which is
really?
one of the largest mining companies in Canada.
Yep.
And then the other is, I can't remember the name, but it's the largest trucking company in
Okay.
Canada, which is based in Montreal at the moment,
Yeah.
but they do most of their business in the United States.
Mm.
And they've essentially, the CEO of this company, he came out and said, well, listen, this is good for business, right? This is good for business. And this is, again, these are your great patriotic Canadian companies. If it's profitable for them, the country be damned. They're going to go where they can make money. And this is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, so I think that just gets back to the general theme. These people are not our friends. We need a working class approach. Related to that, we need an internationalist approach. So what is happening in the movement is there's this general tendency towards it's almost like localism. There's even now, which is kind of amusing in some ways. There's this idea that we need to eliminate. All of a sudden, everyone now knows that there are these massive interprovincial trade barriers. There's actually more more barriers, trade barriers between provinces than there are between European countries, and this is part of the reason why every province's biggest trade partner is not other provinces; it's the U.S. But here you see this narrow-minded provincialist attitude of a lot of the capitalists in the different provinces. They want those trade barriers to protect themselves, not against the Americans, against each other. However, Donald Trump, his threats may be the thing that will actually unite the bourgeoisie in the country and bash down these trade barriers in between provinces. And so this is connected kind of this idea we need to buy Canadian, we need to implement tariffs against American products, and we need to it's almost like diversify and focus on just Canada and like localize, um, or sign trade deals with other countries. But
Mm.
yeah, I guess this is related to we are internationalists. Is related to what I was saying. We are internationalists. Uh, we are. Do communists believe we should just focus only on Canada? Donald Trump said that the border is an artificially drawn line. I saw a whole bunch of liberals online very upset about that. I guess what is the communist I guess long term vision of the Americas, of the world? Like, do we just believe in isolated economies, local economies, or something like that? I don't know, Marco, if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I think, yeah, one thing worth noting is that, like you said, the Team Canada, Canadian big business, is not a friend of Canadian workers. And I would add, American big business and Trump are also not a friend to American workers. Now, there might be a period of, might even have a short lived boom for a period in the United States. We'll have to see. But the fact is, Trump has made grand promises to the American workers. He's talked about wages skyrocketing. He's talked about a new golden age of America. We know none of this is going to happen in the long run, which means at a certain point there's going to be a very serious disillusionment by American workers against the Trump government. And the fact is, Canadian workers have, like you said, far more in common with American workers, and I'd also add Mexican workers as well, workers everywhere, than they do with their own bosses. And that's really our only ally in this struggle, is the American working class. Just a point, because a lot of things are moving in a national direction. But you still have a lot of unions, which are international unions that encompass both Canadian and American workers. A lot of people forget many of the trade unions in this country weren't built exclusively by people in Canada. Most of the time it was unions that started in the United States, which then expanded to Canada, Americans crossing the border, because they knew that they were in a far stronger position if they had workers unionized across the continent than if it were just limited to the United States. That's the same principle that we defend, that the working class is stronger when it's organized across national lines. And these unions, which are essentially lining up behind their governments, and you see this with Unifor, for example, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're standing with their government against their fellow workers and trade union members against the United States. That's the path to ruin. That's the path to suicide, essentially. And it goes against how the union movement was actually built, what made it strong historically. They're destroying that legacy. But we, as communists, I think our role is to point to that legacy and say, this is what's going to strengthen the workers. This is what's going to strengthen your hand. I think that's an important point.
Yeah, so we don't. I think it's absolutely correct what you're saying. You have not just trade unions in Canada that have rallied behind their own the Canadian bourgeoisie, but yes, in America, even on the left wing, this UAW president Sean Fain has come out in favor of Trump's tariffs to protect American jobs. So what you have is workers' leaders on both sides of the border, which is artificially drawn. Look at it; it's straight. It's mostly straight. It is just completely made up fairly recently in history, and to artificially divide people. And they're saying they're going to support the tariffs on their side. You have the Canadian union leaders supporting tariffs on the other side. This is a race to the bottom. It is a race to the bottom in the global capitalist competition, which isn't. The system is in crisis, and what you're having is a squeezing out, and this competition is going to only increase. So what you're going to have is there is no, even if, you could have in a brief situation, some more capital comes into the U.S., maybe that leads to a few jobs in the short term. In the long run, this isn't going to lead to anywhere. It is a race to the bottom. And the bourgeoisie do not care for the working class ultimately at the end of the day. So, I think, back to what you were saying about the working class, our main allies are workers in America, workers in Mexico, and actually that's our main strength. This whole thing about international unions, that's a starting point. I think, yeah, the anarchists, the anarcho-syndicalists in the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, used to have this slogan, one big
Mm-hmm.
union.
Mm-hmm.
And that really needs, this is connected to our general approach, this workers of the world unite. You know, we have everything to gain by a closer union with working class people in America, in Mexico. And you want to stop jobs being shipped to a U.S. or shipped to Mexico or whatever. Well, if you had a working class solidarity, you had international trade unions. That's the way to stop it, because the union can actually just shut down, make sure the jobs don't go anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and defend good union jobs no matter where they are. Um, and yeah, so that's the way to stop this. It's not to rally behind the capitalist class of each country. Yeah, so I think that's one. That's the main thing there that we really need to defend. And I think this is an idea that used to be quite common in the movement, but it's been lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you're having this rallying behind the flag and the bourgeoisie of each country. We need to bring that back. Connected to this is connected to the question that I had raised a little earlier, is we are not isolationists.
Mm-hmm.
We actually are integrate. We do believe that there should be economic integration. Now, Trump's plan, or call it a plan, I'm not sure it's a plan, pipe dream, whatever, big design, is reactionary, and any attempt to annex Canada would be a disaster. I do believe the American capitalists would get their teeth in and start privatizing and attacking. That's what they want to do. But if you look at it, yes, it is more efficient. This is an artificially drawn border. We do believe that we should have more economic cooperation, integration. It will be more efficient, and working class people on both sides of the border, on all sides of the border, have everything to gain from closer cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
However, the only way you could actually do that is under socialism. So in the long run, what we believe is we fight for a socialist federation of the Americas, which can overcome all these artificial divisions, which can truly integrate the economies, which could raise the living standards and provide good jobs and good benefits for everyone on the continent, and connected with a socialist federation of the world. And there is, when you look at it, there's actually absolutely no reason why that can't take place. The only thing standing in our way is the capitalist system and the bourgeoisie of each country, who are jealously protecting their little market. They're kind of like their little fiefdom, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we are internationalists. We defend. We fight for a socialist federation. We fight for working class unity across borders, and therefore, yeah, we fight against this Canadian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fake thing. It's not real. We're not on the same team as these people. We need to fight for an independent working class position, an independent working class approach. And that's the communist response to Trump's tariffs. That's and I won't just say Trump's tariffs, to the trade war, which is two capitalist classes engaging in a war against each other that is not our war. So yeah, this is the response of the Revolutionary Communist Party. I don't know, Mark, if you have any final comments. I think we've more or less touched all the main issues. I don't want to go on forever, but
Maybe just to add a final point going off of what you said, because there's, I think, an enormous potential in the continent that capitalism is destroying and throwing away. Like, you know, something we say about the Russian Revolution is that part of the reason why it was isolated and defeated eventually was because they were counting on a revolution in Germany. Because if you had a successful revolution in Germany, you would have had the combination of German industry and technique with all of the rich natural resources of Russia. And I think what you have between Canada and the United States is that, but on a far greater degree. Imagine if you could combine the advanced industry and science and technology that exists in the United States and Canada with all of this enormous wealth. Imagine that potential. But instead, it's being sheltered behind trade barriers.
Yep.
They're shutting down factories. It's totally irrational. It's totally irrational. And I think that more than anything is an argument for integration on a socialist basis. The wealth, the industry, the technology, it's there. It's almost like it's being, waiting to be picked up and utilized. Whereas right now it's just being destroyed. Because that's what a trade war represents. It's a destruction of the productive forces.
That's it.
Everything that was built up in the post-war period. Trump, Trudeau, and all of their friends are in the process of destroying it. Our job is to save it and build it up far beyond what it's achieved. That's really what socialism represents. And I think that's the only realistic solution in the long run. And I think that's the perspective we have to defend, like you said.
Yeah, so the capitalist system in the West, in countries like Canada and America, have, as Marco was saying, developed the productive forces. As Marx talked about in the Communist Manifestos, the bourgeoisie plays a revolutionary role in developing the productive forces. And they've developed the productive forces to unheard of heights. It's nothing like what it was like in Russia over 100 years ago or in China during the revolution. It's an advanced economy, high productivity of labor, massive technological advancements. And if this was harnessed by working class people, the possibilities are truly endless. And that is ultimately the way out of this mess. Instead, what you have is Trump. Trump is an accelerator of a process that already existed. But what Trump is doing is he's reshaping the world order established after World War II, and he's rewinding the process that led to this big boom and the development of the productive forces after World War II. The protectionism is an admittance of that. The big thing that led to the boom was this globalization, the growth of world trade, and the bashing down of trade barriers. Now what you have is the bourgeoisie, not just Trump, but you have in all major countries, there's a tendency towards protectionism, where because of the capitalist crisis, the bourgeoisie are implementing measures, laws, using the state to protect their markets. And that, as you said, that is going to lead to destroying the productive forces. And the knock-on effect will be declining living standards all over the world. And that is what this trade war represents. Mm-hmm. And we need to be very clear that working class people have nothing to gain from this trade war. We should not be seduced by any argument on either side of the border about this is going to lead to getting a couple jobs, but we need to counterattack them. Blah, blah, blah. That is beside the point. That is not our war. We need to fight for the interests of the working class in Canada, the working class in America, the working class in Mexico, and the working class internationally, for an international socialist federation, ultimately as the only way out of this capitalist nightmare. I guess that's us for today. I don't think we have anything else to talk about. This is the first time we've done video. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We will do this every week or two, depending on if we feel as though there's like significant issues that we need to discuss to try to help everybody understand the communist approach to a certain issue. But thank you for listening in, everybody, and we will see you again, next time.